Carina, thank you so much for joining me on the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Kath. Good to speak.
Amazing. So today we are talking about returning to work after having a baby. So whether or not this is returning to your old job or just getting back into the workforce or whatever it might be. So I'm really excited to chat about this topic because it's a big one. And I think sometimes that early stage postpartum can whiz by and then suddenly we think, oh my gosh, I'm going to work next week. So there's a lot to consider. So what made you get started with this whole side of business?
About Working Mumma?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was about 6 months pregnant with my first son. And I remember lying there one night chatting to my husband, and I was thinking, how am I going to do this? How am I going to be a mum and also have a career? A few people had said to me, look, you're going to have to make a choice. You can't have both. And for me, that's like red rag to a bull. And I'm going, no, if you tell me I can't do something, I'm going to prove to you that I can. So I then was looking around for communities, for support networks, even just on Google I think I even Googled how to be a mum and have a career. And when nothing really came up, I thought, as the classic thing, if you can't find it, build it yourself. Mm-hmm. And so, I put out a survey, got responses, and there just seemed to be this overwhelming need to support women, particularly in that re-entry into workforce. And a lot of women have felt really unsupported about returning into work after maternity leave, and certainly also of being a mum. And we all know, fast forward a few years, that COVID was really tough, for a lot of potentially working mums and the like. So, I then launched it with a free Facebook group that's then since run a couple of events, then started the podcast and also now got the membership. But really the main aim is I've always had it that I want to pay it forward. I want to just help one other mother, being able to navigate the juggle, not have to necessarily go through some of the struggles and the experiences I went through personally returning back into work. We need to increase female workforce participation. We talk about the mental load. How can we, even as Australia's GDP, actually one of the easiest ways we can raise that is by women working. And it's also about removing some of those barriers, but I think also about supporting women as well and creating the systems and structures around it. So I'm really passionate about it. And the more that I can do to help, the better.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so you mentioned there that there were quite a few struggles for women wanting to return to work. Let's dive into that a little bit to start off with. What are some of the key, challenges and struggles that you do find are quite common?
I'd say number one is everyone just feels that there's so much to do. It's tough. And really that then stems back from the mental load. So generally you've got women that will be on maternity leave and they'll be like, okay, right, I might do a little bit extra around the house because I'm home anyway.
Yeah.
They'll then go back to work and then they're taking on all of that extra. And then generally as well, the mental load of, okay, childcare, drop off, pick up, and all the logistics that, as we know, come with kids. And so that's one really big element is the mental load. Another component is also the workplaces as well. So sometimes you can have the most confident person returning back into work, but then you've got a manager or an organization that might not allow you to work from home or not let you work part-time. So you're there going, I want to work, but then this organization's not allowing me. So I'd say that's number two. And number three is, well, if I had to pick my top three, it'd be about our own personal confidence. Often as mums, when we've gone through this whole big journey, I don't know if you're listening about the term matrescence, it's something that I discovered after I became a mum and actually through doing my own podcast. And then they've gone through this big journey. They've got this identity shift. You're no longer this person, but you're this sum of all these little elements of the pieces of the puzzle. And sometimes your values, what's really important to you has also shifted. So you're re-entering back into the workforce, not just who you are, but I remember, I'm my child's mum, and my thought as well is, when you're first coming back, you're dropping off generally a crying child at childcare and going back. And So that also, that emotional load, that identity crisis as well of who am I? Can I actually do my same job? Really comes back into it. So I'd say that, yeah, they're the top three. I could go on, but they're definitely the top three.
And you touched on it there. I think those top three mixed with the emotional side of leaving your baby or whoever it is, like toddler, whatever, with someone else for potentially the first time ever, like at childcare or something like that.
Oh, it's huge. And it's you tour a facility and you're like, oh, okay, you kind of get a vibe and you do your research, but you never know. Like my son, my youngest has been going to childcare now for almost 2 years. Even only a few weeks ago, I dropped him off. I very rarely do drop offs, probably for this very reason. He didn't want to let go of mum. He didn't want me. So luckily that there's some educators there that he loves that he could go into them. But yeah, even though like I've had children going to childcare for almost 5 years, it's still, you're like, oh, maybe he could be home or not. But I'm like, no, I've got to get my job done. But it's still hard. And you have that on you of, leaving other people. I hope that it's okay. And yeah, it's a lot.
That mum guilt seems to start as soon as you become a mum, doesn't it?
Oh, I think even whilst you're pregnant, I think
Yeah.
even probably even before you become pregnant, you have this guilt of, can I do it all, or what's it like? And even when you're pregnant, am I eating the right foods? Am I exercising? And am I preparing? And I don't know what, it's just these social constructs that put up this good mum. But I say, you don't have to be great. Just be good enough and whatever's good for you and your family. Don't look at what's happening next door. Don't look out the rearview mirror. Just focus on yourself and your lane.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say someone who's listening today, perhaps their baby's just a couple of months old. What is like, well, I guess the first question is, how do you know if you are ready to return to work? And I know there's probably a few different discussion points here, but then I'd like to also discuss some steps, like some actual helpful, tangible steps that women could take. So how do we know if we're ready to return to work, Carina? The big question.
Oh, I think sometimes you can't always answer this. Sometimes you've got a physical date that you may have agreed to. I often say plan your return before you actually go on leave. So, set up some of those conversations. So then that way you're not having it all from the start of when you're trying to return, or even set some expectations or have some early conversations. So if you're planning on at the start maybe taking 12 months off or even 10 months, you can just check in. And it's generally you allow yourself, I always say return to work is more of a transition. It should be transition back to work, not return to work. Because yes, physically you're at home one day with Bub and the next day you might be back at the computer and working. But there's also a mental shift that happens during that period as well. And so, yeah, I think there's that. Sometimes you've always got that pull. And I know some women, they're like, look, I can't do baby 24/7. I also need something for myself. And that's probably one of the indicators if you're ready. But there's also then the other element of, what your workplace is saying to you of, you said 12 months. But also you do legislatively have, entitlements to extend that if need be. And you can also negotiate that. You might then also financially, I know, times are a lot tougher now. So you might have even said 12 months to your employer, but actually you might be bringing that forward because of financial reasons. Double income families, you may need that for mortgage repayments and things like that. So that's also I would say a factor that could influence it. But certainly emotionally, that's where I think if you've set yourself a date, it's starting that mental transition. Okay. It's just like if you've got a birthday coming up or a big event, you start thinking about it subconsciously. Okay. Like I had a milestone birthday this year, but for probably 6-12 months prior to that, I was thinking, okay, what am I going to do? What do I want to do? How am I going to celebrate it? Even how am I going to feel? Like I turned 40 and I was like, how is this it was quite a bit of a realization of,
Mm.
oh my goodness, how did I get here? It's the same thing when you're returning back into work. You're probably going to have a milestone and then think, okay, you're going to start going, I've got that date. What am I going to do? And you will subconsciously start thinking about it.
Yeah, that's a really good, valid point then, because sometimes, yeah, it's like a double-sided situation where a date will help subconsciously get ready. But then sometimes, do you find as well, some women just might never be ready, and the only way they can get ready is actually just to get back to work. Do you know what I mean? You
Yeah.
never feel ready. You do it, and then you feel ready.
Yeah. And look, I had that with my actually my second mat leave. I thought because he was born, I took off from the end of January and I thought, oh look, I might come back by the end of November and just see it. But actually then I think it was about September, I said, no, can I extend this and I'll just start the calendar year. So I just knew in myself, I was like, look, I'm just going to take the first, like, just the full 12 months off. I thought, I'm not going to have this again. I only knew that we were only going to have 2 kids. I'm just going to enjoy this. So I was able to, I just knew in myself that I was like, why go back for an extra month? Like,
Yeah.
before the end of the year. So I think there's some of those things, in yourself emotionally. And that's where it's always, I think, a good thing, as you were saying before, about some tips. I would say journal or speak to someone about how you're feeling, like, or even just, hopefully, fingers crossed, Bubs is sleeping. Take some time out, pour yourself a cup of tea, have a cup of coffee, probably just sit down and just journal or write down your thoughts about how you're feeling and just do that personal check-in. Are you okay? And also how you're feeling about it. And sometimes return to work can actually bring up a lot of anxiety. So then if you're feeling anxious, what is it about that you're feeling anxious? Is it about leaving your child with someone else? Is it about going back to work and not knowing, feeling like, oh, there's been all these org changes and I don't know what I'm going to do? But just by actually putting down a list and just writing it, getting it out of your head as well and onto
Yeah.
paper, there are actually scientific things to say that it does make a difference. So I think also that's one of the key things as well, that, write down how you're feeling, have a chat with your partner. If you're wanting to extend it, for example, could you say, look, I know things are going to be tough a bit. Look, we may really need to just knuckle down on the budget, but look, this is how I'm feeling. And then so also it's not just your decision individually, but then you're also making it as a family unit. Because also there's also preparation that needs to generally happen if you're going into childcare. Even sometimes letting your child, start a little bit earlier before you go back, so you're able to feel that they're settled. So you're not having to go through day one of childcare plus your first day back. That's going to be stressful for both of you. And as we know, babies will feed off our stress as well. So
that's a
yes,
big one, actually. My firstborn, I wanted to delay start of childcare for as long as possible. And I was a mess the first few weeks going to work. I remember sitting in the car outside work crying because I felt so terrible leaving my baby at the time. Whereas my second baby, I was like, okay, I think we both need a bit of transition. So then I could pick her up early, get her used to the place. So that having a few weeks buffer for me, it was really helpful. And on that note, a lot of childcare centres only accept new, and correct me if I'm wrong, but new babies, or toddlers, new people at the start of the year. Is that right?
It all depends on the centre. Sometimes you can actually get in from the start of the year. Others, if you're letting them know halfway through, they can make some adjustments and allowances for it. So it's one of those things. Just try and get in as soon as you can. Get your child on the list. I know there are some crazy periods of wait lists. And certainly in outer suburbs, it seems to be worse than inner. But it's really dependent on probably the area and of how enticing probably it is for childcare centres to get built. But I could go on off a whole other tangent on that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's probably just be mindful of it. When you're doing your tours, speak to your childcare provider and find out what the process is.
Okay. Are there any other tips that you might have for someone who might be listening and is thinking about returning to work in the near future?
I would be suggesting, as much as you can, try and have a conversation with your partner around the mental load. This can often be, there's the Eve Roderick fair work fair play cards on my website. I've also got a bit of a checklist, about reviewing this with your partner and having a look around what do you want to keep doing, what do you want to stop doing or outsource, and also what do you want to potentially swap with your partner. Have that honest conversation, and that conversation can sometimes be quite emotional. People also have different backgrounds and perceptions about what each partner should be doing, and sometimes it is very gender orientated. But sit down and have a chat with your partner and say, or your husband, and say, look, I can't do it all. What do you want to take on? What do you not? I remember for a little while saying to my husband, I really think we should get a cleaner. And he's like, no, we don't really need one, blah, blah, blah. Then the time came, our house, just the bathrooms were just getting so messy. It was just disgusting. And he agreed to a cleaner, just a trial. And then I remember that first day they came, I could physically feel this stress leave my body. It was just this weird experience. And then ever since, my husband's gone, yep, clean up, tick. And even if we had to, review expenses, I am sure he would go, nah, we'll take that. We'll keep doing the cleaner, because it's just such a big part. We hate spending the weekends cleaning. And that. So definitely that's where as well, look at the mental load. What do you want to outsource? Even things like, online shopping. Could you do online shopping or have click and collect for your groceries, just to try and reduce that time? Also, do you need a gardener? What other support do you need? So that's where as well, particularly around the mental load, my husband and I have got an agreement that, he does all the drop-offs. I try and do pickups. But if I can't, then I get him, he lives closer to our childcare than what he does. But we've also got the agreement that whoever's pretty much on pickup, the opposite one is doing the cooking the dinner. We have this family thing now that we've started it for the last few years, that as a family unit, we want to eat dinner together every night. And also our kids eat better when we're all eating as a family. So that's meant that we've had to make probably some professional sacrifices, and we have to leave the work earlier so we can get home, get dinner, and be on the table by probably 5:30, 5:45. So that's meant, and then whoever cooks, the opposite then does the washing up. So there's some things that we've found that just help us pretty much navigate. I do all the grocery shopping, whereas my husband does all the washing. He hates the way that I put the clothes in the washing machine. I don't know what it is, but that's fine. I don't care. So it's things like that. I definitely think around the mental load, because that's one of the biggest things that women say. They're just feeling exhausted, that there's too much to do. And that always comes back to the mental load. And I also think the more that we can share the mental load at home, this then has a ripple effect back into organizations. And if you're talking about gender diversity in your workplace, if other people see a man, particularly a father, leaving the organization early, even if it was like half an hour to go get his kids, that is showing leadership. That's also then may give permission for other people, particularly if they're junior to them, that, okay, right, they can leave the workplace as well and actually spend that time with their family. I've put this on to fathers before, and they're like, yeah, I want to be that role model. I want to be there for my kids. So that definitely the mental load for me would be the biggest thing.
And I do just want to say, on behalf of, I'm sure, many listeners out there, what you've described is probably the ideal. Like, I know my husband, for example, he's never home at dinner. It's just his work hours, and we try to get our family dinners on a Friday, in the weekend. But so for whoever's listening, I think what it's more about, and correct me if I'm wrong, Carina, it's about having that open conversation and working out what's right for your family, because I know some people will be shift workers, and there's just so many different situations. So as you said before, don't look at the person next to you, think about your own lane and what can you be doing as your family unit to help with your mental load, because it's a big one, isn't it?
Oh, it's huge. And for me, I think one of the biggest issues that whenever I put up what's really like, at the moment, what's your biggest challenge? Often people will say mental load, and the secondary, they'll probably say boundaries. And actually creating that work-life balance, or I like to call it work-life harmony. I don't think we can have, how can everyone be singing off the same song sheet? But it's, look, everyone's different. What works for me is going to work for someone different. Again, I do more travel than my husband doesn't travel for work. So for me, it's different. You have that balance that we try and get. But but it all stems from having the conversation. Don't just assume, just have the chat.
And we're talking about returning to work, but this conversation, like, my kids are now all at school, and this conversation needs to happen, more than ever. So it does keep, like, it's not just a one-off conversation. Let's get our jobs sorted and set and forget. It's like a continuing, evolving beast, isn't it?
I think it is. And just one other thing that I just want to add in as well about return to work. It's not all about you. It's also about your organization, and also about having that conversation and preparing, your manager or your workplace about returning back into work. So also understanding, what do you want? What's important to you? Do a bit of a why assessment, your values. Think about what's important, but then also, what do you want from your employer? And also, don't be afraid to ask for it. I know that women will sometimes go, oh, look, I'm grateful to have anything. But that's often when we'll take probably less of a job. We'll take often sometimes even demotion, just so we can feel that, we're back into the workplace. But there's nothing, if you don't ask, you don't receive. This is a bit of a confidence piece, but certainly back yourself in asking. And also then, if the manager says no, they can knock back. But they've also got to come back to you now with a fair work. They've got to come back to you in writing with fair and reasonable reasons why not to. So understand and have a bit of a conversation, but have that open communication as well with your workplace, because it's not just you. Yes, you want to return back to work, but you also want to return back to a good, supportive environment.
Okay. Well, on that note, what are some topics that someone might be able to bring up with their workplace?
So they might say, I would like to work maybe 3 days a week or 4 days a week. About, this is my transition plan into work. They could say, okay, I maybe want to return January next year. And there's something called keeping in touch days, which you can also get money for. And so you could say, look, can I use the keeping in touch days to reconnect into the organisation, to then come back in if there's a team meeting or a strategy meeting or something like that. Also, Christmas parties coming up, potentially you could see if you can use that. So definitely having that conversation about how you can reconnect. Also say, as I said earlier about the days, what flexibility do you want? Like, for example, do you want to, ask for maybe finishing earlier and start early, finish earlier, or work from home? I know lots changed with COVID, but also there's some workplaces that are like, no, we're going back full office, or, or they're completely at home. So can say, look, I know that personally I went back initially 3 days a week, and then I've increased it to 4 days, but that was also set around some communication with my manager to do that. And also then, what are your expectations, and don't be afraid to ask for it. Something that I wish that I'd asked for, and I would certainly recommend, almost pretend that you're a new employee. So if you said to your manager, can I have some key meetings just to get up to speed again with what's happening, rather than just assuming I know the organisation, but can I have a few key meetings maybe with some key stakeholders to not be a completely new employee, but just re-onboard you a bit. And that's also from a manager perspective, just having that process as well. So as I said, just really setting your expectations, and don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, some great ideas there. Do you have any final tips for mums or parents who are looking to return to work after having a baby?
I don't feel that you're going to have all the answers straight away, and don't think that you need to be this super mum. There's no such thing as being a super mum. There's nothing like, what you see on Instagram is, literally 20 seconds of someone's life. It's okay to have a cry. It's okay to feel a little bit of guilt. Or probably, have a lot of guilt, but, knowing what you're doing, knowing your why, and about why you're working. That sometimes, like recently I was made to feel guilty for working. And yeah, I did actually have that guilt, but then I came back to my why, and I know why I'm working: for my kids, for myself, for my family.
Yeah.
And then understanding that for me is really my sort of, my foundation. And I always say to people, know your why, and it helps you navigate your boundaries, navigate your work-life harmony. And that for me is really important. Also see return to work as probably about a 6-month, even a 12-month transition. As we were having babies, as we know, it's, you've got 9 months, but then you've got the 4th trimester. So it's really a 12-month process of having a child. Think about that as well, about your return to work, that it's not just this, you can't just flick this switch. Yes, physically you're return to work, but just take it, as we know with kids, they don't just walk and crawl straight away. There's a growth and a development. That's just like you going back into work. And also when you're first going back, do a few tasks initially that give you confidence. Don't feel like you need to do everything straight away. Just give a few things, build yourself up, just like we say to our kids, you need the stepping stones and the stepping blocks to help you build yourself back up. Do the same thing in your return to give yourself that confidence, because it will no doubt shift your confidence. It will feel like you're this new employee and like, oh my goodness, do I even know how to do an email again? And that, but you will get there. Back yourself, but that's also where your confidence, your mindset, and having cheerleaders around you and talking to people will certainly support you through. So yeah, lots in there. As you can tell, I could probably talk about this topic forever.
And when you were talking then, it just reminded me how I went back at about 1 year after my first, and then I felt like as soon as I'd gone back to work, my child was getting sick from childcare. And then when I'm finally getting into it, I then became pregnant with my second. And so it can be a bit of a rocky start. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Certainly can be. It's, the sickness roller coaster is something that I don't often talk about, but definitely there in the first 12 months.
Well, thank you so much, Carina. How can people find you?
I'm on Instagram at Working Mumma Community. So Mumma is MUMMA. I've also got the Working Mumma podcast. Of Kath has been a guest previously as well. I've got the website, workingmumma.com.au. And if you're on LinkedIn, it's Carina O'Brien, or you can also follow Working Mumma on LinkedIn. So yeah, pretty much just type it into Google and see what comes up.
And I do have to say that podcast has got some great episodes. So the recent one was navigating burnout, mental load, and career ambitions. You've got a few mum stories, how managing chronic illness whilst juggling family and a career. So yeah, you got some brilliant episodes. So definitely go. I'll put all those links in the show notes.
Thanks so much, Kath.
Have a great day. We'll chat to you soon.
You too. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mumma podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mumma freebies found at www.fitnessmumma.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at Fitness Mumma so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer, materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. I'll see you soon.